Half the world's population face elections this year with big ramifications for investment markets. The Reserve Bank warns on hoarding of $100 bills, and Microsoft's worth hits $3 trillion US, more than the value of the Australian superannuation market. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It's Monday, the 29th of January, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Great show ahead of us. Plenty of sort of starstruck stories, things like Microsoft's value and stuff like that.
Oh, big picture stuff, Sean. That $3 trillion, that is just staggering. So I can't wait to talk about that story with you. After the show as well, you have an interview coming up with one of our favourite guests, Carlos Cacho from Jarden, Australia.
Yeah, so we talked to Carlos all about the Australian banking sector, particularly Commonwealth Bank, National Australia Bank, Westpac and ANZ. They are on a tear. Their share prices have surged and Commonwealth Bank's been hitting new highs, almost got to $116 a share last week, highest ever. So we asked Carlos why and will it keep going? More importantly, perhaps, can they keep rising in terms of their share price? Great chat with Carlos, always is.
I'd say it's a must-listen interview,
I
Sean.
think so. I'd go must-listen. Yeah.
You know, every day. So sometimes I get criticised by listeners for describing every interview as a really interesting interview. So you know what? Today I'm introducing a new one into the vocab. Must listen.
So I like regular listeners. The words Michael uses about the interviews give great hints into what he thinks of them. Just leave it there. So if you're a regular listener, at this point, listen to what Michael says and you'll know whether it's a good interview or not. Normally that's a reflection of me as opposed to the talent, but still.
Oh, so mysterious. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be luring a few people through to listen each day and have little kind of vocab bingo, lexicon bingo, Sean. That sounds exciting, doesn't it? The main story this morning, on with the show, more than 50 countries around the world are holding elections this year, affecting about 4 billion people or half the globe's population. Of course, this has pretty significant implications for financial markets and, of course, for the global economy.
Quite incredible. It's a coincidence that so many countries in the developed and developing worlds, some with huge populations, are going to the polls in 2024. In fact, 7 of the 10 most populous nations are voting this year. The US election at the end of the year is the best known, of course, while the Brits, in all likelihood, will be voting later this year. That election has to be held by the 25th of January next year. So in all likelihood, the Brits will be voting this year. The biggest election easily is India, where incumbent Narendra Modi is likely to be returned. The election is due before June. Modi says that likely over 1 billion people are now eligible to vote in that country. Already this year, there have been votes in Bangladesh and Taiwan. Next month, the world's 4th and 5th most populous nations, Indonesia and Pakistan, go to the polls. Indonesians will vote for the president, vice president, and nearly 20,000 representatives for district, provincial, and national parliaments. How's that for a logistical nightmare? Given the incarceration of former Prime Minister Imran Khan, the Pakistani election threatens violence. In March, Russians and Iranians vote, both hugely populous countries. Given both are run by authoritarian regimes, neither polls are expected to be free nor fair. South Africa, Mexico, Croatia and the European, they're also due to vote this year as well.
It's really quite extraordinary, isn't it? As you say, it is a coincidence, but it is just a staggering list when you put it all together.
Yeah, it sure is. And they just keep rolling out. The fact that 7 of the 10 most populous nations are voting this year is definitely unprecedented.
So why then does it matter so much for investors, Sean?
So sometimes it's geopolitical issues. The fact that the incumbent DPP party won in Taiwan means tension with China will continue. The opposition party was more likely to be softer towards China. At other times, particularly in emerging markets, investors can easily get burned if the expected doesn't eventuate. Take India. Consensus is Modi gets another term, and under the Prime Minister, India has modernised and become much more investable. If he loses, that changes things totally. And then there's the first world economies. Normally elections in those countries don't result in generally not major changes. Whoever wins the UK election probably won't cause investors to run to or from Britain. That's not the case in the US this year, the world's most important economy, of course. If Donald Trump wins, suddenly there's a whole lot of uncertainty in the market. That impacts currencies, it impacts bonds, it impacts equities, all sorts of asset classes, currencies particularly. Whatever party wins in the US, in Britain, in Mexico, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, that'll make a big difference to those currencies. The run of elections this year is also just going to add a whole layer of uncertainty for investors, and that in itself leads to more volatile markets. Anyway, here on Fear and Greed, we will regularly be talking about international elections, I think, Michael.
Fear and Greed, the election podcast. Makes it sound quite niche, really, doesn't it?
Very niche.
Okay, you know what? That was a terrible idea, and I'm going to stop brainstorming mid-show. Now, obviously, Sean, local markets were closed on Friday for Australia Day. How are things shaping up this week?
Well, futures markets suggest the ASX will rise on opening this morning. The market, which finished on Thursday at 7,555 points, is just 74 points off its all-time record back in August 2021. The performance has reflected confidence that the US and Australian economies will execute a soft landing. The economies will slow, but not go into recession. That means much of the impetus locally comes from interest rates and what's going to happen. We'll find out more about that on Wednesday when the Bureau of Statistics releases its December quarter Consumer Price Index. Analysts are hoping for the trend lower to continue. That would pretty much ensure the Reserve Bank does nothing at its next board meeting next week. Now, who is the best person in the country to talk about this sort of stuff, Michael?
I know this one. This is one of those kind of quiz questions that you can actually throw at me, and I will know the answer. It is our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas.
Yes, exactly. And so straight after this show, in fact, after the interview after this show, we talk to Stephen in the week ahead, and we have a great chat about where the economy's at and where it's headed for. He's very excited about the inflation numbers. He's quite confident that they won't be too high, and that means rates will be on hold.
Yeah, the week ahead this week is definitely, Sean, a must listen.
Oh, a must listen.
Now, what happened in international markets over the weekend?
Wall Street ended down a touch over the weekend, but still trading around record highs. The Federal Reserve Board of Governors meets later this week. Most analysts expect no change in interest rates in the world's biggest economy. Oil prices are back up again, so expect to see that at the petrol bowser in coming weeks. I got a bone to pick with the service stations of the world. Michael?
Yeah, go on.
Why is it that I leave my home in Sydney, in northern suburbs of Sydney, and fill up at $2.17? I drive 3.5, 4 hours west to Orange, which is my hometown. When you're in the mountains, you're paying about $191. In Orange, the lowest was $1.67. So, $1.67 to $2.17, what's that, 50 cents a litre, at a 50-litre car, $25 more to fill up in northern suburbs of Sydney than Orange in petrol. I don't get it. Thoughts?
That is quite extraordinary. It is a massive difference. Do you use an app to tell you where it's going to be cheaper?
No, I should though. I should.
Yeah, because there's like Fuel Check and kind of various other versions of that where you can just, and we talk about this on How Do They Afford That, which is our sister podcast that kind of goes into all of these kinds of questions, Sean. But it's one of those apps that will let you, if you're driving from Sydney to Orange, you can put your route in there and it will tell you kind of make sure you fill up before you leave Orange, or make sure you fill up in the Blue Mountains, or and you can kind of plan your trip according to your wallet. There you go.
$25.
Little budgeting tip.
That pays for the lollies on the trip.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a no-brainer.
I digress. Gold still trading above US $2,000 an ounce. Bit of surprise given the growing confidence that the US economy will land softly. Aussie dollars worth about 65.8 US cents. I sound like a broken record on that one. Cryptos are up again. Bitcoin pushed back above 42,000 US dollars a unit over the weekend.
All right, there's a bit going on. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, there's still a week till Parliament returns, but already lobbying over supporting the government's proposed tax changes is off and running, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese not saying whether he has talked to Greens leader Adam Bandt about the alterations.
That probably means he has, I'm guessing.
Yep.
Currently, Stage 3 tax cuts are legislated, and the changes announced last week, which gives bigger cuts to lower and middle income workers, smaller cuts to higher income workers. Those changes, or those proposed changes, need the support of the crossbenchers. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said the government will put the plan to Parliament, and the fact that the latest plan helps people earning under $45,000 will ensure it passes. The Greens previously have not supported the Stage 3 tax cuts. they've already indicated that they like what Albanese's doing, but they actually don't think he's gone far enough. So there will be a little argy-bargy on that one.
Now, Qantas, Sean, has called in management consultants to help try and improve its on-time performance.
Yes, so new boss Vanessa Hudson's proving a bit of a fan of the management consultant. Earlier, she called in BCG to help with the carrier's customer relations problems, a few of those. Now she's called in McKinsey to overhaul its operations, according to a report in the Financial Review. Apparently, BCG was also asked to pitch for this latest piece of work, but McKinsey got the gig. Comes at a pretty tough time for Qantas. Mind you, pretty much every day over the past 6 months has been a tough one for Qantas. But right now, it's in the midst of management change. It's facing an Australian Competition and Consumer Commission court challenge on the sale of tickets for flights that had already been cancelled. Obviously, its on-time record has not been good. Some months, it's actually behind Jetstar, its discount operator. So it's calling in the consultants to help out. Now, Michael, I have a question for you. Have you ever worked closely with management consultants?
Not in that respect, no. No, have you?
Yeah, I have. I've sort of, those guys I have, McKinsey's and BCG and Deloitte we did, and just at different times. And they're kind of an interesting crowd.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the jury's out on consultants. Obviously, incredibly smart people, and talk about deep diving into data and stuff like that. Phenomenal. Everyone I've worked with, no one has been a dud. So I've never met a consultant who I've thought, wow, you're not very smart. They're all really smart. Mostly really nice people too, which sort of surprised me a bit. But you just, sometimes what comes up with and you think, yeah, that might look good on a spreadsheet. Not sure whether that's going to cut it in the real world.
And I also get a little confused sometimes, which probably won't come as a surprise to you, Sean, but why the expertise to fix the problem does not already exist within a company, particularly a company that has had success doing this in the past themselves. In terms of Qantas, they've had good on-time performance in the past. Can't they just look at what worked previously and go, this is what we are not doing now, let's reinstate that, rather than spending a whole lot of extra money and racking up those bills for shareholders?
Yes, I think part of the problem is that they haven't got it right. And so it's kind of like shock therapy, how we're going to do it. Other times you call in consultants to confirm what you're going to do. So if you're a CEO and say, I want to do this, I want to cut costs by 30%, and you go to the board and the board goes, oof, really? Do you think you should do that? We better check that you're right. Let's get the consultants in. And the consultants who are employed by the CEO come and say, hey, guess what? The CEO's right. And they confirm what's going to be done. That's a little bit cynical, but I think that happens sometime as well.
Yep.
But always the best ideas come from the floor. And the best consultants, to be honest, consult widely, shall we say, in the workplace. And so they actually get a lot of those good ideas from the floor. Anyway, we have really been going on.
And you know what, Sean? I'm sure we're going to now be contacted, and we welcome it. Absolutely. Head to fearandgreed.com.au or follow us on any of our social media platforms, on LinkedIn or Instagram or any of them. If you are in consulting and want to take issue with anything that Sean has said, to a lesser extent to anything that I have said.
I did say you were nice people. Yeah,
absolutely. Then please get in touch. We would love to hear from you. Now, Sean, moving on, the Reserve Bank says the majority of the $100 billion worth of banknotes in circulation are being hoarded as a store of value, and a chunk is being deployed to facilitate crime.
So the Reserve Bank said between 9 and 26% of all cash, or somewhere between $9 billion and $26 billion, is being used to make legitimate transactions to pay for goods and services. So let's say it's 26%. What about the other 74%? That's what I'm wondering. And that 26% is actually down about 5% since the start of COVID. So people are definitely using cash a lot less. 7 to 11 billion of Australia's cash is being used to facilitate crime, the Reserve Bank reckons. There's another 7 to 11 billion being used in the shadow economy to fund tax avoidance or other illegal purposes, like buying illicit drugs. But the overwhelming majority, between 55 and 80%, is being hoarded, including about $20 billion that's been taken overseas. Now, the growth in low denomination banknotes, think $5, $10, $20, has been slow. It's growing at about 1% annualised on a per capita basis. In contrast, demand for high denomination banknotes, $50 and $100, has been strong and the key driver of growth in overall bank demand. The final statistic from the bank, which I love. The Reserve Bank also found that between $5 billion and $9 billion of cash has been lost.
Lost? As in misplaced?
Down the back of the couch. It's a big couch.
You know, Sean, this feels like an opportunity to me. If there is up to $9 billion of cash that's waiting to be found.
Wandering around the place.
This is a potential kind of... There could be a new gold rush over this. If only it was metal and we could get out there with our metal detectors.
Yes. Those polymer notes, surely there's something that can detect those. I don't know.
Oh, I like these. See, I said I wouldn't do any more brainstorming, but look what we've come up with here. Now, 2024 could be another tough year for new listings on the Australian share market unless there is a sharp upturn in confidence. This is according to a new report by advisory and accounting firm HLB Mann Judd.
The firm's annual IPO watch, released last week, says there was only 32 new listings on the ASX last year. 32, and most of those were small cap companies. It was the lowest number since HLB started its report 20 years ago. In pre-COVID years, new listings of more than 140 a year were common for the ASX. The report says only 5 small cap local companies, 4 miners and 1 wealth manager, are registered to go ahead this year. And that rate is even lower than last year. The largest proposed listing of an Australian company is only seeking $10 million. There's also, of course, a potential IPO of Virgin Australia that would be much bigger, but it's not sort of on the drawing board. Well, it's on the drawing board, but it certainly hasn't approached the ASX yet. In contrast, there were dozens of companies to delist last year, including SDA Health, United Malt, Janus Henderson, Invacare, Yellow Brick Road, Newcrest Mining, Blackmores. Already we've seen Allcom and Sezzle delist. So basically we're having far fewer companies on the ASX and far fewer big companies. And that's actually a problem for super funds who are trying to invest their money in Australian shares. Well, they want to be safe and go beat large caps. There's not actually a lot of options around.
Sean, the number of aviation accidents in Australia fell to their lowest level in 17 years in 2023, notwithstanding 3 mid-air collisions.
Data provided by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau shows there were 139 accidents reported last year, the lowest since 2006, and well down on the 10-year average of 209 a year, according to a report in The Australian. They included 19 fatal accidents compared to an average of 21 a year, resulting in 33 deaths, slightly above the 10-year average of 30.5. Of particular concern was the spate of mid-air crashes. 3 occurred last year and 1 in late 2022, claiming a total of 10 lives. Mid-air collisions are extremely rare, but suddenly there was 3 of them last year. Remember the SeaWorld tragedy in January last year? That was an example of helicopters in that instance. Any accident is too many, but there were mid-air accidents last year which are extremely rare, Michael.
And finally, Sean, before we get to international news, an update on a story from last year about the New South Wales number plate, 1, as in just the number 1, New South Wales 1, which was going up for auction.
Yes, it sold for $11.505 million for that number plate. At the same time, the Queensland number plate Q1 was up for auction. It sold for $5.655 million. Now, the previous record for a publicly sold number plate in Australia was $2.45 million, held by the New South Wales plate, the number 4. That was 2017. Queensland's Q1 breaks the record for the most amount of money spent on a 2-digit plate, surpassing Victoria's 14. That one sold back in May 2022 for $2.27 million. New South Wales 1 has now been confirmed as one of the most valuable number plates in the world. The most valuable was Dubai's P7 plate, sold last year, went for about $22.8 million. Do you sometimes think people have got too much money for their own good?
Yes. I mean, if you've got it, you are more than welcome. You're entitled to spend it on whatever you want. But $11.5 million? Goodness me. I
presume it's an investment, isn't it?
Is it?
I don't
know. And this is why we're not an investing podcast, Sean.
That's right.
Okay, turning to international news now, Sean, and United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has promised to hold to account any UN employee involved in acts of terror after allegations that some refugee agency staffers were involved in the October 7 Hamas attacks on Israel.
Guterres also implored governments to continue supporting the United Nations Refugee Agency for Palestinians, that's UNRWA, Refugee Agency for Palestinians, after multiple countries, including Australia, paused funding. Guterres said the Secretariat is ready to cooperate with a competent authority able to prosecute the individuals. He also said that tens of thousands of men and women who work for the UNRWA, many in some of the most dangerous situations for humanitarian workers, should not be penalised. In his first direct comments on the issue, the UN chief gave details about the UNRWA staffers implicated in the abhorrent alleged attacks. His words, abhorrent alleged attacks. Of the 12 implicated, he said 9 had been terminated, 1 was confirmed dead, and the identities of the other 2 are being clarified. Along with Australia, Britain, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Finland, and the United States and Canada have all paused funding to the aid agency, a critical source of support for people in Gaza.
Finally, Sean, the story that we mentioned at the top of the show, Microsoft has hit the $3 trillion market valuation on the back of unbridled optimism about the benefits of AI.
It joins Apple as the only companies to breach that mark. Now, Microsoft hit a new peak of just under $406 a share over the weekend. And on the close, the company's valued at $3 trillion. Let's get a bit of perspective on this. Microsoft and Apple are individually worth way more than the total value of every company on the ASX combined. They're worth more than the value of all of Australia's superannuation funds combined. So just one of those companies worth more than all the super funds combined. Together, Apple and Microsoft aren't far off the total value of private property held across Australia. Every home. The big 7 stocks in the US, which also include Nvidia, Tesla, Meta, Google, and Amazon, now make up almost 30% of the top 500 stocks. That's the S&P 500. And Apple and Microsoft are well and truly the biggest. They are monsters.
Wow. What a story. Okay, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Carlos Cacho from Jarden, Australia is your guest.
Yes, all about the banking sector and the outlook for the big banks. Commonwealth Bank, National Australia Bank, Westpac and ANZ.
Yeah, one must listen, followed by another must listen with Fear and Greed the week ahead, featuring resident economist Stephen Koukoulas. They are both coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 29th of January, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.